The water runs constantly in the shower blocks of Corcoran State Prison, a sound that should be cleansing, but instead carries something else entirely. Steam rises from cracked tiles, creating a fog that transforms the space into something from another world, where shapes move in periphery and sounds echo in ways that make their sources impossible to locate. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, their inconsistent illumination creating pools of shadow between the harsh white glare. Officials describe these facilities as hygienic necessities, controlled environments where inmates perform basic self-care under appropriate supervision. They speak of schedules and procedures, of safety protocols and camera surveillance. But the women who have stood under those shower heads know a different truth. They know that in prison, the shower is not where you get clean. It's where you become most vulnerable, most aware that your body exists in a space where privacy is mythology and safety is something you negotiate, not something you're given. The architecture tells its own story before any human enters the frame. Prison showers are designed with efficiency in mind, not dignity. Open bays with multiple shower heads, sometimes without dividers, sometimes with partitions that rise only to chest height. The floors slope toward drains that clog regularly, creating standing water that turns pink with diluted blood, gray with dirt, yellow with fear. The tiles, once white, bear the stains of decades, each discoloration a fossil record of violence that no amount of industrial cleanser can erase. The cameras are mounted high on the walls, their placement carefully calculated to avoid direct views of naked bodies, a nod to legal requirements about privacy. But this calculated blindness creates something worse than total surveillance. It creates zones of invisibility, corners where the cameras can't see, spaces behind pillars and partitions where anything can happen and often does. The guards know about these blind spots. The inmates know about them. Everyone knows. And this knowledge becomes its own form of currency in the economy of prison survival. Tonight, we tell 3 stories, 3 women, 3 different prisons, 3 versions of the same nightmare that plays out in tiled rooms across the world. These are not composite characters or fictionalized accounts. These are documented cases drawn from court testimony, DOJ investigations, and survivor interviews. The names have been changed, but everything else remains exactly as it happened. Her name was Sarah, though that's not what they called her at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York. There, she was inmate 04B2156, 26 years old, convicted of drug possession with intent to distribute. First offense, sentenced to 3 years. She would serve 18 months before the shower situation made her sentence irrelevant. Sarah arrived at Bedford Hills in October 2019. Young, white, middle class, background, no gang affiliations, no prison connections, no understanding of the invisible rules that govern survival behind bars. Within her first week, she identified the patterns everyone learns. The shower schedule, supposedly randomized for security, actually followed predictable rotations tied to guard shifts and mealtimes. The morning slot at 5:30 a.m. seemed safest. Fewer inmates, tired guards, cold water, but cold water was manageable. For the first 3 weeks, this system worked. Sarah showered quickly, kept her head down, avoided eye contact. She learned which shower stall had the best sightline to the door. She learned to never close her eyes, not even when rinsing shampoo. She learned to dress under her towel, movements efficient and practiced. These were survival skills acquired through observation and whispered advice from her cellmate, a woman serving her second stint who understood the unwritten curriculum of incarceration. But on November 12, 2019, the pattern broke. A new guard started the morning shift. Officer Marcus Reynolds, 34 years old, 7 years with the Department of Corrections. His personnel file, later obtained through the DOJ investigation, showed 3 prior complaints from female inmates, all dismissed as unfounded. All complainants subsequently transferred to other facilities or placed in solitary confinement for various disciplinary infractions. Reynolds positioned himself differently than previous guards, closer to the shower entrance, in a spot where the steam cleared just enough to provide sightlines into the stalls, despite the carefully angled cameras. Sarah noticed immediately. Every woman in that shower room noticed. But noticing and being able to do anything about it are different things entirely. The first incident was small. Reynolds commenting on how long Sarah took to shower, suggesting she might need help if she couldn't manage basic hygiene efficiently. The threat was implicit, wrapped in official-sounding concern. Sarah showered faster. The next day, Reynolds was there again, this time commenting on the commissary soap she used. Expensive soap. Must have family sending money. Must be nice to have resources. The subtext clear to anyone who understood the language of prison power dynamics. By the 3rd week of November, Reynolds had established a pattern, always working when Sarah was scheduled to shower, always positioning himself where he could watch, always making comments that walked the line between official duty and something else entirely. Sarah tried switching her shower time. Her request was denied. The schedule was set for security reasons. Changing it would create complications. On December 3, 2019, Reynolds entered the shower area while Sarah was washing her hair. Eyes closed, soap in her hair, the most vulnerable position possible. She heard footsteps that didn't belong to other inmates, heard the door to her stall open, opened her eyes to find Reynolds standing there, blocking her exit. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. The violation was in the presence itself, in the power differential made physical, in the understanding that she was naked, trapped, and whatever happened next would be her word against a correctional officer's. Reynolds spoke quietly, told her that her behavior had been noted, that she seemed nervous during showers, that this nervousness suggested she might be hiding something, that more thorough searches might be necessary, that cooperation was always noticed and rewarded, that difficulty was also noticed and remembered. Then he left, leaving Sarah standing underwater that suddenly felt scalding, her body shaking with adrenaline and terror and rage that had nowhere to go. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah didn't shower. She used the sink in her cell for basic washing, baby wipes purchased from commissary, anything to avoid the shower room when Reynolds was on duty. But prison hygiene standards are enforced. After 10 days, she was written up for failing to maintain personal cleanliness. After 2 weeks, she was threatened with disciplinary segregation if she didn't comply with shower schedules. On December 18th, Sarah tried to file a complaint. She went to the counseling office, requested to speak to a supervisor. She was told that accusations against staff required evidence, that cameras would be reviewed, that if her allegations proved false, she would face charges of filing a fraudulent complaint, which could add time to her sentence and result in immediate transfer to administrative segregation for her own protection. Sarah pressed forward anyway, gave her statement, described the incidents in detail. The investigation took 6 days. The camera footage, when reviewed, showed Reynolds in the shower area during his assigned supervision times, standing in positions that were within protocols. The audio didn't capture the conversation on December 3rd. No other inmates came forward as witnesses. In fact, 3 inmates provided statements that they'd never observed inappropriate behavior from Officer Reynolds, that he was always professional, and respectful. What the investigation didn't document was that those 3 inmates were part of a crew that had an arrangement with Reynolds, that they received extra privileges in exchange for maintaining order on the unit, that contradicting them meant being marked as a problem, that being marked as a problem in prison can be a death sentence, just a slow one. On December 24, 2019, Sarah was informed that her complaint had been investigated and found unsubstantiated. She was also informed that for her own safety, given the hostile environment her accusations had created, she was being transferred to protective custody pending reassignment to another facility. Protective custody at Bedford Hills meant 23 hours a day in a cell barely large enough to lie down in. 1 hour of recreation in a cage, showers 3 times a week, alone, under the supervision of 2 female guards who treated her with the contempt reserved for inmates who make trouble. Sarah spent 4 months in protective custody. In March 2020, as COVID-19 hit the prison system, transfers were suspended. She remained in isolation, watching her mental health deteriorate, developing symptoms her facility psychologist diagnosed as adjustment disorder with anxiety. The medication they prescribed made her foggy, disconnected. She stopped eating regularly, lost 23 pounds, started having panic attacks that the guards treated as manipulative behavior designed to get attention. On June 15, 2020, Sarah was found unconscious in her cell. She'd swallowed a bottle of the anxiety medication they'd prescribed, hoarded over 2 weeks. She survived, was transferred to the medical unit, recovered physically, then was returned to protective custody because the original threat assessment hadn't changed. Reynolds was still working at Bedford Hills. Sarah was still an inmate who'd filed a complaint. She was finally transferred to another facility in September 2020, served the remainder of her sentence, was released in April 2021. 7 months later, a Department of Justice investigation into Bedford Hills, triggered by multiple complaints from civil rights organizations, uncovered a pattern of sexual misconduct by staff. Officer Marcus Reynolds was one of 7 guards named in the report. He was suspended with pay during the investigation, later accepted a resignation in lieu of termination. No criminal charges were filed. He now works as a security supervisor at a private prison in Pennsylvania. Sarah, last documented in a 2022 follow-up interview by Just Detention International, lives with her parents, has not been able to maintain employment, suffers from severe PTSD that manifests primarily around issues of hygiene and privacy. She cannot shower in enclosed spaces, cannot use public restrooms, cannot be in situations where doors are locked behind her. Her therapist estimates minimum 5 years of treatment before she can function independently. She's 29 years old. The cost of those 3 weeks of showers at Bedford Hills, calculated in medical bills, therapy costs, lost wages, and human suffering, exceeds $400,000. The cost to the system was 1 guard's resignation. The lesson learned by other inmates was clear. Speaking up doesn't bring justice. It brings isolation, retaliation, and a level of suffering that makes you wish you'd stayed silent. The second story takes place 4,000 miles away, in a men's facility that houses transgender women. This is a documented reality in many states, where trans women are classified by their birth certificates rather than their gender identity. Her name was Maria. Inmate number 442895631 at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, California. She would survive 2 years in that facility. Barely. Maria was arrested in 2017 for credit card fraud. First offense, sentenced to 3 years. She had been living as a woman for 8 years, had been on hormone therapy for 5, was saving money for gender confirmation surgery. None of this mattered to the California Department of Corrections, which in 2017 still classified inmates by biological sex. Maria, despite presenting as female, despite identifying as female, was sent to a men's maximum security facility. The shower situation became immediately clear. The facility had open bay showers, 20 shower heads, no dividers. Men showering together under the supervision of guards who viewed the trans woman in their midst as entertainment, curiosity, or prey, depending on their individual dispositions. Maria's first shower at Donovan was her education in a specific kind of hell. She entered the shower room at 6 p.m., the assigned time for her unit. 40 men, 20 shower heads. Every eye turned to her. The catcalls started immediately. Then the propositions, then the threats. Guards watched, did nothing. One laughed. Maria stood under the spray of water for maybe 90 seconds, not removing her prison-issued shorts and undershirt, just letting water soak through fabric. Then she fled back to her cell, dripping, still dirty, terrified in ways that transcended language. For the next week, Maria didn't shower at all, used her sink, used baby wipes. But the same enforcement that caught Sarah caught Maria. Hygiene standards must be maintained. On her 8th day, she was given a direct order by a sergeant: shower or face disciplinary segregation. Disciplinary segregation in a men's prison as a transgender woman meant even less protection, even more vulnerability. Maria chose the shower. What followed was 2 years of negotiations with survival. Maria developed a system. She would wait until 2 a.m., the darkest hour of the night shift. She would trade her commissary to other inmates to be let out of her cell. She would pay another inmate to watch the door to the shower room. She would shower in the dark, partially clothed, never more than 3 minutes. The water was always cold at that hour. The danger was minimized but never eliminated. The cost of this system was everything Maria had. Her family sent money for food, for hygiene supplies, for phone calls home. It all went to pay for protection, for 3 minutes of safety, while she tried to wash away the fear and filth. She lost 40 pounds because she couldn't afford commissary food and wouldn't eat the facility meals, which required going to spaces where she was vulnerable. She developed severe vitamin deficiencies. Her hormone therapy, which should have continued under medical supervision, was discontinued because the facility doctor deemed it optional cosmetic treatment. The guards at Donovan had their own relationship with Maria's vulnerability. Some ignored her. Some showed pity that manifested as small mercies, looking away when she violated rules, not enforcing minor infractions. But others saw opportunity. Officers who would appear at her cell during night shifts, who would stand in front of her during the rare times she was forced to shower during regular hours, who made clear through presence and implication that their silence about her arrangements, their tolerance of her rule violations, their protection from other inmates, all came with expectations. Maria never explicitly agreed to anything, but she also never explicitly refused. This ambiguity, this gray zone between coercion and consent, haunts many survivors of prison sexual exploitation. Was it assault if she didn't say no? Was it survival if saying no meant losing the protection that kept her alive? These questions don't have simple answers, which is exactly how predators in power prefer it. In 2018, a new policy was implemented in California prisons following a lawsuit by transgender advocacy groups. Transgender inmates would be housed according to their gender identity, unless security concerns dictated otherwise. Maria applied for transfer to a women's facility. Her application was denied. The reason given was that her security classification as a maximum security inmate precluded transfer to the medium security women's facility. Her security classification was based on the violent nature of her cell at Donovan, where she'd been attacked by another inmate and had fought back in self-defense. The system had created the circumstances that now justified keeping her in those circumstances. On March 15, 2019, Maria attempted suicide. She drank half a bottle of industrial cleaning fluid she'd stolen from a work assignment. The chemical burned her esophagus and stomach lining, required emergency surgery, left her with permanent damage that means she'll have digestive issues for the rest of her life. She survived, was treated, and was returned to Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, to the same cell block, the same shower room, the same negotiations with survival. Maria was released in July 2020, her sentence shortened for good behavior and time served during medical treatment. A 2021 interview by the Transgender Law Center documented her post-release life. She lives in a shelter in Los Angeles, cannot maintain stable housing because she cannot shower in communal facilities, cannot work jobs that require physical labor because her digestive damage means she cannot eat regularly or maintain energy, cannot form relationships because intimacy triggers panic attacks rooted in 2 years of negotiating her body as currency for survival. The California Department of Corrections paid $125,000 to settle Maria's lawsuit regarding her suicide attempt and the denial of adequate medical care. They admitted no wrongdoing. Officer names were redacted from public documents. The policy regarding transgender housing has been revised. 3 years later, transgender women are still sometimes housed in men's facilities when security classifications dictate it. The showers are still open bay. The negotiations continue. The third story is the youngest. Her name was Crystal, inmate 09547721 at Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Ohio. She was 19 years old. First offense, drug possession, sentenced to 2 years. She would serve 6 months before everything changed. Crystal arrived at Marysville in January 2021, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. The facility was on modified lockdown. Showers were strictly scheduled, 1 pod at a time, to minimize contact. Masks were mandatory. Social distancing was enforced. The pandemic protocols, ironically, made the facility safer in some ways. The usual predatory dynamics were disrupted by the constant supervision required to enforce health regulations. Crystal was assigned to D-Pod, a unit for lower security inmates, young women, mostly first offenses, mostly drug-related charges. The shower schedule for D-Pod was Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 3 p.m. 10-minute slots, 6 showers per session. A female guard named Officer Patricia Morrison supervised. For the first month, Crystal's experience was unremarkable. She showered according to schedule, kept to herself, made no trouble. Officer Morrison was professional, if cold. The other inmates in her pod were similarly cautious, everyone trying to serve their time without incident in an environment where COVID infection could mean medical segregation, or worse. But in February 2021, Crystal made a friend, another young woman named Jasmine, 21, serving time for check fraud. They bonded over shared circumstances, similar backgrounds, the particular loneliness of first-time incarceration. They showered during the same shifts, looked out for each other, shared commissary when money was tight. It was the kind of alliance that makes prison survivable. Human connection in dehumanizing circumstances. Officer Morrison noticed the friendship, began making comments about it, asking if they were special friends, suggesting that their time together during showers was longer than necessary, implying things that Crystal didn't understand at first, then understood and was horrified by. But Morrison's implications came wrapped in policy language. She was just ensuring appropriate boundaries were maintained, just enforcing rules about excessive familiarity between inmates, just doing her job. On March 2nd, 2021, Morrison separated Crystal and Jasmine during shower assignment, put them in different shifts. When Crystal asked why, Morrison explained that codependent relationships between inmates were considered security risks, that continued association would be noted in her file, that her parole eligibility could be affected by behavioral assessments that included ability to maintain appropriate boundaries. Crystal didn't argue. Arguing with guards meant disciplinary reports. Disciplinary reports meant no good time credit. No good time meant longer sentence. Crystal showered alone after that. Or, rather, she showered with other women from the pod she didn't know well. Morrison began lingering during these sessions, standing closer, making comments about how Crystal carried herself, how she looked, whether she was taking care of herself properly. The comments were always just ambiguous enough to deny if questioned, just concerned enough to sound official, just personal enough to feel like violation. On March 15, 2021, after a shower session, Morrison told Crystal to remain behind, said there was a problem with her hygiene that needed to be addressed, that she smelled, that this was a health issue, that it needed to be documented. Morrison conducted what she called a health and welfare check, which involved Crystal standing naked, while Morrison examined her for signs of illness, infection, or inadequate self-care. There were no signs of anything wrong. Morrison documented the check as routine. Crystal reported feeling sick, violated, but unable to articulate exactly what had happened that crossed a line. The checks became weekly, always after showers, always conducted by Morrison, always framed as health concerns, documentation requirements, standard procedures. Crystal began showering less thoroughly, hoping that if she actually wasn't clean enough, the checks would become legitimate rather than pretextual. This backfired. Morrison began recommending additional hygiene products, offering to obtain special soaps from the medical unit, creating a relationship of dependence where Crystal owed gratitude for these special considerations. By April, Crystal was having panic attacks before shower days. She would shake, vomit, experience heart palpitations that the facility medical staff treated with anxiety medication that made her drowsy and disconnected. She stopped eating, lost weight, developed insomnia. Her cellmate, witnessing the deterioration, asked what was wrong. Crystal tried to explain but couldn't find words that made sense. How do you report feeling violated when nothing technically illegal has happened? How do you complain about health checks that follow protocols, even if those protocols are being weaponized? On April 24, 2021, Crystal told Jasmine everything during a rare moment when they were in the same common area. Jasmine had her own history with Morrison, similar comments, similar attention, nothing she could quite name as assault, but everything feeling like assault adjacent. They decided together to file a formal complaint, not just against Morrison, but requesting investigation into her conduct patterns, her use of health and welfare checks, her separation of inmates who showed mutual support. The complaint was filed on April 26, 2021. Within 48 hours, both Crystal and Jasmine were transferred from D-Pod to administrative segregation, pending investigation. The reason given was that their complaint created a security risk, potential for retaliation from other inmates loyal to Morrison. They were placed in separate cells, allowed out 1 hour per day, no contact with each other, limited phone privileges, no access to commissary. This was protection, they were told, for their own safety. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Morrison was placed on paid administrative leave. Every inmate in D-Pod was interviewed, Most stated they'd never observed inappropriate behavior. Some mentioned that Morrison was stricter about hygiene than other guards, but that this seemed appropriate given COVID protocols. The health and welfare check logs showed Morrison had conducted such checks on multiple inmates, always properly documented. The cameras in the shower area showed Morrison standing in positions consistent with supervision duties. There was no evidence of physical contact, no evidence of explicit sexual language, no evidence of anything except 2 inmates making accusations that couldn't be substantiated. On June 8, 2021, Morrison was reinstated. The investigation found insufficient evidence of misconduct. Crystal and Jasmine were informed they could return to general population, but not to D-Pod, which was Morrison's assigned unit. They were transferred to different pods on opposite ends of the facility. The complaint was noted in their files. Both were denied early release eligibility. The reason given was documented behavioral concerns and inability to adapt to facility structure without creating conflict. Crystal served her full sentence. Released in January 2023. Age 21. In a follow-up interview conducted by the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, she described being unable to shower without her mother standing outside the bathroom door, unable to be in enclosed spaces with authority figures, unable to explain to potential employers why she has gaps in her work history and trouble with references, unable to trust that anything she says about her own experience will be believed over the official narrative of people in power. Morrison still works at Ohio Reformatory for Women, still supervises showers, still conducts health and welfare checks. The policy hasn't changed. The oversight hasn't increased. The shower room remains the same tiled space where vulnerability meets power and official procedure masks unofficial violation. These 3 stories span different facilities, different states, different years, but they share the same architecture of exploitation. The same understanding that shower rooms are spaces where privacy is eliminated in the name of security, where that elimination creates opportunities for those who hold power to abuse those who don't, where reporting abuse means isolation, retaliation, and being marked as a problem that must be managed rather than a victim who needs protection. The United States Bureau of Justice Statistics, in their most recent National Inmate Survey published in 2020, found that 4.4% of state and federal prisoners reported sexual victimization. That's approximately 80,000 people. In women's facilities, the rate is higher. 6.9%, over 12,000 women per year. Half of these incidents involve facility staff. The other half involve other inmates, but often with staff complicity or awareness. These statistics don't capture everything. They don't count the incidents that happen in shower rooms where cameras don't reach and survivors don't report. They don't count the coercion that stops just short of contact, the threats wrapped in procedure, the violations that are psychological rather than physical. They don't count Sarah, Maria, and Crystal, all of whom were released before the survey that might have documented their experiences. The Prison Rape Elimination Act, passed in 2003 with bipartisan support, was supposed to address these issues. 20 years later, PREA standards require cameras in shower areas, but allow for camera angles that preserve prisoner privacy by creating blind spots. Require staff training on sexual misconduct, but define misconduct narrowly enough that much of what happened to Sarah, Maria, and Crystal doesn't qualify. Require investigation of all allegations, but set evidentiary standards that make substantiation nearly impossible when it's an inmate's word against staff. Reform efforts continue. Organizations like Just Detention International the Transgender Law Center, and the Ohio Justice and Policy Center document cases, advocate for survivors, push for policy changes. Individual lawsuits occasionally result in settlements and revised protocols. But the fundamental architecture remains unchanged. Prison showers are still spaces where people are required to be vulnerable under the supervision of those who hold absolute power over them, where the cameras that supposedly ensure safety create blind spots that enable abuse, where reporting violations means risking consequences worse than the violations themselves. The question isn't whether these three stories represent isolated incidents or systemic patterns. The DOJ investigations, the class action lawsuits, the statistical surveys, the academic research all confirm the same truth. Sexual exploitation in prison environments, and particularly in shower facilities, is not aberrant behavior by individual bad actors. It's a predictable outcome of systems that strip people of agency while placing them under absolute control of others, that eliminate privacy while creating blind spots, that promise protection while punishing those who report violations. Sarah, Maria, and Crystal are out now, free in the technical sense. But freedom doesn't mean recovered. Sarah still can't shower alone. Maria still can't form intimate relationships. Crystal still can't trust authority figures. The tiles they stood on, the water that should have cleaned them, the cameras that should have protected them, all live on in their nervous systems, in their hypervigilance, in their inability to ever feel fully safe in their own skin. And tonight, right now, as these words are read, other women stand under those same shower heads, navigate the same dangers, make the same calculations about whether being clean is worth the price of vulnerability. They learn the same lessons that Sarah, Maria, and Crystal learned, that their bodies are not their own, that safety is not guaranteed, that reporting abuse brings punishment, that the system will protect itself and its employees long before it protects them. The water continues to run. The steam continues to rise. The cameras continue to watch from angles that preserve just enough blind spots to make abuse possible, while recording just enough footage to make denial plausible. And society continues to look away, uncomfortable with knowledge that somewhere behind these walls, in tiled rooms we fund with tax dollars and staff with our employees, human beings are learning that the price of being clean is measured in trauma, in silence, in slow destruction of everything that makes survival worth surviving. If you seek the truth hidden in spaces designed to break rather than cleanse, the documented stories of women who've learned that water can be weapon and walls can be accomplices, subscribe to Prison Diaries. Because every tile tells a story, every echo carries a testimony, and every drop of water that falls in those shower rooms washes away a little more of what we claim to be as a civilized society. Sarah's story matters. Maria's story matters. Crystal's story matters. And they are not alone.